Welcome to Costumes of Fantasy and Futurism, presented by the Costume Designers Guild, in partnership with Joanne Fabrics and Craft Stores, with platinum-level support from ABC Studios Costumes. Be sure to have your questions ready, and we look forward to hearing from you. While we're waiting, if you're watching on a larger screen, please go to the settings at the bottom of your Vimeo player and choose either 1080p or 720p so that you have the best possible viewing experience. And now, Costume Designing the Fantastical with Colleen Atwood.
On earth.
Do you know where she is?
Hello, Alice. Your queen has missed you. Delighted to meet you. Where is this man?
Costume Designing the Fantastical with the legend that is Colleen Atwood. We are super lucky to have her here today. And thank you to all you guys for joining us. So Colleen, welcome.
Thank you.
Now, introducing you, okay, well, we got like 4 Oscar wins, I think 3 BAFTAs, perhaps 7 Costume Designers Guild Awards. It's huge. Your back catalogue is astonishing. I'm not going to waste too much time telling everybody about who you are. They've just seen the video. They know your greatest hits. Frankly, if they don't know who Colleen Atwood is, this is probably not the panel for them. But yeah, we're so pleased to have you. And I'm not going to waste time talking. I'm going to get straight into some questions. What we're going to do is I'm going to ask some questions to Colleen, and later on, a little way into the chat, then I'll ask you guys if you want to submit some questions, and I'll tell you how to do that via your computer-y thingies. Okay then, here we go. Colleen, as I said, welcome. How are you?
Good.
Keeping well. I think before we delve into specific projects of yours, it might be nice to start with where it all began for you in terms of costuming the fantastical. Because your early work, such as Manhunter and Married to the Mob, are very far removed from the genre, aren't they?
They are. I started in New York as a costume designer, and those were the jobs that were happening there. I hooked up with Jonathan Demme in those days, who, you know, it was a different kind of time, and we made wonderful movies together, like, you know, Silence of the Lambs, you know, all those kind of New York movies. And it was a great sort of place for me to start. And then I did a movie called Joe versus the Volcano that John Patrick Shanley wrote and directed. And while I was working on that movie, I met Bo Welch, who was the production designer, and he introduced me to Tim Burton because Tim was prepping Edward Scissorhands. So I kind of went from sort of fantastic realism of Joe into the sort of magical realism of Tim Burton. And Tim, you know, gave me an opportunity to sort of explore that world. And then, you know, I've always gone back and forth, and I like doing all kinds of movies. That's what makes the world go round for me. So it's sort of, even though I've gravitated toward that, it's still fun to go back and make a movie like Bombshell, or, you know, just a movie that's a great story with a great director.
You have, as you mentioned, director Tim Burton. You've worked with him, I think, over a dozen times now, since Edward Scissorhands being the first. What is it that makes your relationship just so simpatico? How do you work so well together?
I think that we have, in a weird way, Tim grew up in Burbank. I grew up in Eastern Washington. And I think we have a sensibility, as much as it doesn't really say that's what it is when you see the movies. But sometimes we're sort of minimalists in a way. It's about what's not there as much as what's there. And I think with Tim, like I've seen him actually bring a character to life with one stroke of his pen. I mean, he's an amazing artist, first of all. And I studied art and painting, so I have that sort of simpatico with him. And I think that also there's just an intuitive thing between us that's a connect. Now,
Edward Scissorhands, in terms of look, it's fascinating. It has a kind of like sort of pastel-y 1950s thing going on. And then you have Johnny Depp in his principal costume, which is so distinctive and so crazy, but brilliant. Can you tell us a bit about how you created the world, and in particular where his costume came from?
Well, Edward was really a conception of Tim's from early days. I think it's somebody he'd lived with in his mind for a long time before the movie actually happened. So he had a lot of sketches and things of Edward. What happened is, you know, when I started to make the costume, it was, you know, I can't remember the exact year, early 80s. And it was really, or maybe even mid 80s. I can't remember. Anyway.
The film was 19.
But anyway, it was before there were a lot of tech fabrics, all that. And it was a costume that had to be almost like today's superhero costumes in the way it fit and everything. And I sourced all this amazing leather, and I was putting it together. And I wanted to incorporate stretch in the costume in the seams and stuff to keep the leather from bagging out. For those people that sew, they'll know what I'm talking about. But what was really, really hard at that point in history is to find somebody that understood what I was talking about. I had 2 or 3 tailors, like good tailors, try to make the costume, and they didn't get it. And it was really frigging annoying. And I was making, at that point in history, Western was over by Paramount. That's how long ago it was. And in the back of the corner of the tailor shop was this old Russian who had made clothes back in the day for the ballet. And he actually knew what I was talking about. And once I found him, the key to that costume was solved. we could make it how we wanted it. Johnny wore that costume in Tampa, Florida for a few months, and it was in the summer. So the humidity was 80, the temperature was 80. Literally, his makeup would just kind of lift off his face in a sea of sweat. I mean, it didn't matter. Cool suits didn't really do it. He hated those. So we really had, that suit really went through the trials. And the thing that's amazing about that suit is there's only 2 of them that are for real, that were made for the movie. Nowadays, you'd have 20 of them lined up. But at that point in history, with, you know, the way we made movies and stuff, there were only 2 suits. And Stan Winston designed the hands, and his group, I mean, it was incredible the first time we put the hands on like gloves, and they all moved in such an incredible way. It was really an exciting moment.
How did you get Johnny in and out of the suit? I mean, I guess he was stitched in.
2 pieces, the belt and stuff, it zipped up the back, but with Velcro over the zip so you didn't see it because it's kind of torn leather. So you could hide closures, but it was pretty basic. It was pants and a top, but the way the belts were and stuff, we could cover up the joins so you didn't see them. But, you know, we had it good so you could change in and out quickly, a key thing with those kind of costumes.
How about the rest of the world then? The Avon lady, sort of like I said, a pastel-y 1950s world, huge contrast to Atwood. How did that look come about?
Well, that was a combination of the production design, Tim's concept of, you know, suburban America, where everything was just sort of perfect in a sort of storybook way. So we sort of settled on a palette together, and then we could I riffed on it with different characters and how they did their clothes and, you know, different prints for different people and all that. But it was a real nod to the 50s and probably, you know, to Tim's childhood.
Interestingly, going back to something you said before about how you found yourself working in the fantasy genre, I recently spoke to Michael Kaplan, a costume designer who's largely known for his work in sci-fi, which he says kind of happened by accident. Did you really, in the back of your mind, kind of always want to sort of work in the fantastical realm of costume design, or was it a bit like for him that you just sort of walked into it with Tim and it continued?
Well, I think meeting Tim was one of the luckiest things that happened to me as a costume designer, in all honesty. I didn't really study film, but the films I loved that I admired were like the films of Visconti, Curacao. So I love the style and the sort of scale of an epic sort of film. And I think I really sort of in my mind visualized myself doing films that could tell a story in that way. They're real, but they're a little bit pushed.
Mm-hmm. Your first Oscar was for Chicago in 2002, I believe. And what strikes me most, and this is something I noticed a lot in your work, is your use of color. And I find that one of the most interesting uses of color in terms of your work, because am I right in saying that there is a sort of use of color to differentiate between the sort of real and imaginary aspects of the Chicago story? Is that how you use color? And why did you choose to, if you did?
You know, I don't really attune to color theory per se, but I do it more by character. And I think that the sort of backdrop of Chicago and this sort of dark nightclub scene, the sort of nod to Bob Fosse in a way, the sort of, you know, Rob loves black. Because I always say, do you like black or black today? So he really does like kind of the architecture of the black and white sort of thing. And that definitely played into Chicago for this sort of stage numbers and that part. So in the rest of the movie, I tried to soften the palette with Renee's softer colors and sort of pull away from that. And you know, it sort of played out in the movie, but it does it movies almost like a black and white movie in some ways. It doesn't have a lot of color. When it is color, it's almost like the sort of feeling of the vulnerability of a nude color, of a sort of nakedness. And that was kind of where I was going with that.
Yeah, it's interesting to say you don't sort of buy into color theory too much necessarily. But I've noticed you used red in particular quite a lot, which is a bold color choice. A lot of people are scared of it. I'm thinking of Memoirs of a Geisha, there's Alice, Dark Shadows, there's a red dress in that. Are you drawn in particular to that color? Do you enjoy using it? And why do you use it?
I like to use it artistically. I find it's kind of an unstable color in film in a way, because sometimes you can't control how it looks from when it's photographed to when you see it on screen. But it's become more manageable now with color timing and the sophistication of that. But I've always liked red as more of an accent than a real color. So in the scale of the film, which when I think about designing film, I don't just think of each costume separately. I think of the costumes for the whole movie. And for me, if I plug in red at a certain point, it's sort of a moment, a heightened moment in the story, like Eva Green's dress in Dumbo, the first, the second time she flies and danger happens and things like that. So it's sometimes, works that way for me, the use of red. Geisha, because of the makeup, the red of the lips, the red of the inside. I mean, that's not something I made up. That is something that's true to form to the story I'm telling.
You mentioned Dumbo, and that when I was watching it recently, it's a lot of extras in Dumbo. There's a lot of extras in a lot of movies you do, but in particular that one kind of stood out to me. And I started to think that although you do make beautiful, incredible, astonishing creations for the principals, I think sometimes perhaps we overlook the amount of work you put into your extras, your background artists, if you like. Do you find that sometimes that it is as difficult creating the background artists, the extras, and their world as it is the principals?
I think they're an integral part of the storytelling because they're a layer of the story. So I think the world that you're creating as a costume designer is also reflected in the crowd or extras. On Dumbo in particular, we had months, literally 3 or 4 months of 500 extras a day, plus the circus performers. So we had days of dressing and maintaining that number of costumes. Because of the period and the amount of availability of costumes for Dumbo, I made at least 50% of the extras costumes because the real costumes to rent out there were not big enough for today's people. They didn't fit. So I manufactured a huge amount of costumes, and luckily I had the budget to be able to do that, which was great. But those clothes got worn to death. Every detail of those costumes, every color, because it's a traveling circus, it went from town to town. So I had different tonalities, different, like from the rural to the city. So I had different societal levels of costumes, which to me are great. And the thing is, sometimes it depends on how movies are shot. Sometimes you have all this crowd. On the Beast movies, I have massive amounts of crowds too, which we dress head to toe in the period and everything. But in some movies, you don't notice them. But if they weren't there and they didn't look the way they looked, it would take you out of the story in a funny way if you really watched for those kind of things. And with that comes hair and makeup for the crowd, and all the things that come together to make a good-looking movie.
Oh, that's interesting because, like I said, we mentioned color just a little bit, and you briefly touched on it there. But how important is texture and use of different fabrics to you as far as bringing your characters to life?
I love the the challenge of textures. As I've been doing this for a while, so as time has gone by, the availability and the variety of fabrics has changed a lot. There's less sort of weird little things you can find that are magically old, and it's thinner on the ground. So I do a lot of screening and texturing of fabrics. The shot that was just up of Charlize as the queen with that necklace on, I found that cool chain that's just so kind of snake-like. And at first I figured out to use it with the headdress, but then I didn't really like the stomacher that much, so I added it to that, and it just gave it a dimension that the fabric didn't have. And I think the more we get into the HD camera, that it's, especially with dark colors, that texture and a little bit of ability for light to not just go flat is a really fun challenge, and something I address on every movie, probably for the rest of my working life.
Well, you mentioned Charlize there in Snow White and Huntsman. We can't cover your frankly ridiculously huge CV in this talk. We can't cover the whole thing, but from a personal point of view, one of my favorites is of the work you've done is Snow White and Huntsman, and in particular Charlize Theron's character in that. And I believe we've got just a little video clip to look at from the first film, and then we'll have a little chat about it. That is astonishing. I did read, actually, you use some pretty crazy fabrics, or certainly parts of the costumes were very interesting, different ideas. I'm pretty sure I read something about beetles at some point. And I don't know if this was for Charlize Theron's character or not, but can you just tell us a little bit about how you approached the film and your overall designs for it?
Well, I really, with Rupert, the director, who was very attuned with fashion and style and design, I really, had a great time exploring all the different materials that we could use for this person, whether it was creatures that had formerly lived or a reference to skeletal things and all that, which can be really get to be cliche. I mean, how many skulls do you want in a costume? How many bones? But I like the idea of referring to nature, but putting it into another kind of world. So the wedding procession that you saw in the clip, that collar, I'd seen a lot of architectural, kind of an art installation, I think, with that. And I have this guy that works with me that's a craftsperson named David Bethel. And I said, Bethel, look at this, and he's one of those guys that's just kind of, and we were trying to figure out what to make it out of. We tried it in a couple things. And then he had a piece of parchment there. And he did these cuts in the parchment and he twisted it. And I go, that's it. And then we shellacked it and did some stuff to it. But it was so incredibly simple to him. But to me, I was like, how do we make this? We have to do each thing separately. But you just it's really fun to do those kind of things because you use materials that you don't normally use to make a costume. And it makes it exciting. It makes it new. You take it to a different place, whether it's chains or, there's her crown was interesting too, to come up with that. And I actually used paper a lot to figure out accessories and headgear, because it's so much faster in a fitting. You can keep cutting it and changing it in the fitting before you actually make it in metal or something that's very time consuming. I did the same thing with Sasha's in Alice with his hat, and getting the scale of stuff right. It can be really useful. And I've kind of always had this fantasy of making some, a whole group of costumes out of paper, like just fantasy paper, not to wear, but just to have. But like that costume on Sasha that you see on the screen, that hat, like I had, again, it was with David, but like I said, come into the room, bring a roll of brown paper. And we did that hat in like a million different shapes. And because I had Sasha like for one fitting and then he came back to work, which is for a guy like that, that's tricky. So I had all these different hats, sizes and shapes, and the shoulder scale and all that, because he wanted to not be able to get in doorways but still be able to move. And so it really worked a lot of stuff out in a fun way with paper in the room. And then you can kind of fly with it and plug it into different fun materials.
I'm guessing with something like Sasha's outfit there, you can't really make multiples of these. I'm guessing you maybe can only have like a couple of them and have to be incredibly careful.
Well, I guess it depends on the needs of, the particular, what they're doing in the costume dictates that. It is possible to make multiples of Sasha's costume, that costume. Charlize's, I either had one or I think I had 3 of that costume, or 3 versions, because he had one version with a really long cape, but the configuration waist up was the same. Charlize's wedding dress, for instance, the labor on that is really massive. So it probably took 4 people working on that dress over time, 3 weeks to make it solid. That's 4 people just doing that dress. So that's a lot. That's a huge chunk of the workforce that you have when you're doing a big movie or any movie dedicated to one costume. So
like a proper wedding dress, yeah.
I mean, it eats up a lot of time. So as you design, you have to kind of have this, you have to figure out the math of it all. Like, okay, I've got that one. How can I make this one simpler? And then you just keep going and you keep spinning out and making them bigger and crazier and stuff. And you're like, oh, how are we ever going to get it done? But the girls always manage to pull it off somehow.
You returned for the sequel, Winter's War. And I think we have a clip of that, actually. So we'll just have a quick look at that before we chat about it.
This is why I made you what you are.
Hello, Eric. I've missed you.
I was just wondering, one of the reasons you decided to return to do the sequel is, do you get protective over the world that you create in terms of costume and think, I don't really want to hand that over to anybody else to interpret. I want to keep doing it myself.
Yes, I think it's like you feel like at the same, you go, oh, should I do the sequel? But it's like for 1 second you say that, and then you're like, ooh, what can I do next? Because you want to take it to another level in a different place. And of course, in the sequel, I had 3 women, which was awesome. I still had lovely Chris, and but I had female warriors, and I had the sister in Emily Blunt with the ice element and all these things. And I was like, yeah, I'm in. The producer, Joe Roth, called me and said, will you do it? And I said, yes, of course. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It was really, I mean, I think it's time for another one.
And you would be doing that.
A big frock, you know what I mean? It's like how many times, like you get to do fantasy, but then that's a level of a scale of it.
Yeah. Did you ever at any point, and particularly during the sequel, sort of think, oh my gosh, we have gone too big here. This is just going to keep getting bigger and bigger. We need to pull ourselves back in a bit.
Not really. I was trying to come up with new things so I didn't repeat myself, you know, with the character, and with feeling like the evolution of Charlize as a character in a different place, and character-driven things with Emily and stuff. So it was, you know, it was a challenge in that way, besides just like going, oh my God, it's not a fashion show, you know, it's a story. You have to tell a story as well. So it's kind of a dream world of getting to sort of do both. And then you have people, Jessica Chastain, you know, Emily Blunt and Charlize Theron. I mean, come on. They're like, they're goddesses without a costume on. So, you know, it's pretty good to design clothes for all three of them.
It must be tricky. Like I said, I spoke to Michael Kaplan recently, and he talked about Fight Club and was given pretty much free rein to do what he wanted with Brad Pitt's character. It was only at one point when he tried to put him in a green tube top, did director David Fincher go, hang on, you may have gone just a little too far. You might have to pull in just a little bit.
Pull it back.
One of the things that really strikes me about your costumes as well is they're very much a complete costume. To really appreciate them, you need to see all of them, or certainly as much of them as you can. How does that work with you on set with, say, like the cinematographer? I mean, do you have to have discussions with him? You know, how much is going to be seen? Am I going to spend all my time on this huge train and it's just shot from the, you know, the chest up? How does that work for you?
I have to let go of it in a way. You know, I always make sure that this part is as good as I can get it, because, you know, 90% of the time that's what you're going to see. And it's really important to me that the neck and the way it sits on the actor in the neck and the shoulders really, really matters. Luckily for me, the costumes that I've done that are sort of that scale of costumes, like in Geisha or Dumbo or Huntsman, the directors embrace the costumes. And if a director embraces a costume in that way, they will work out a shot, if it matters to them for the story, where the costume gets seen. So I always trust those guys to sort of embrace that. And I try to make costumes so they move, which is very important to me. You can make a big costume, but if it doesn't move and people can't do anything in it, it becomes, you know, redundant. I mean, it becomes a problem, which isn't something you want. And when a costume becomes a problem, a lot of times they won't shoot on it. They'll just, like, you know, do it the easiest way. So if you work out the mechanics of it, that it works easily, gracefully, and sort of seamlessly with the actor, I think it helps it have a life on screen.
Right. Yep. I mean, you've never had like a disappointing costume moment where you've gone, oh, I did so much on that and it didn't get seen.
Or it's cut totally out of the movie.
Oh, yes, of course.
The Beatles dress that you refer to as Charlize ultimately ended up not in the film. It's been on display different places and stuff, but it just didn't, the scene, they just didn't need the scene. So they just, you know, took it out. And that happens. It's just, I don't know. I just accept that stuff. It's part of the job, you know. It's not about you, actually. It's about
right.
And about the story and the actor. And, you know, that's what you have to realize.
The greater good.
Kind of like the mask situation, you know, just put it on.
Now, you know, all good costume designers pay attention to details, but your details are mind-blowing in your costumes. I'm thinking in Alice of the White Rabbits on her purple costume. You've got the fox buttons on the Mad Hatter. I mean, these are very, very tiny details that may or may not get seen. But how important is it to you that they are there? I mean, is it for the actor, for you, just to make sure you've done it the way you want it to be done?
Well, it's so exciting to me when I find something like in the world that, like a button that has the right detail on it that goes with the story. And to me, that's fun and exciting for the shoppers and people I work with. It's always fun. Like, oh, look, I found a rabbit thing. It can get a little bit like, no, I don't want that rabbit. Thank you very much. But I like the idea, like with Daniil, of taking the sort of line drawings from the story and applying them to costumes, like when it works. The actors, I find, embrace that. They like and notice the details, whether it's a little thing in the lining, a little pocket. With Johnny, the thread bandolero, he was just like, wow, it was, we found a little pincushion ring online. Who knew anybody had a pincushion ring? But the things that you discover in that way sometimes help the actor discover a nuance of his character that he can do something with. Or it's a starting point. It's sometimes they go, oh, it's in my way, I won't wear it, but they kind of get something from it. So I think it individualizes each costume for character, and so they like it. And I like details, especially up here, that are really, it's really important to me that it's clean, that it's not, that messy sewing on a costume makes me a little bit crazy. So, I'm picky about stuff without kind of getting too precious with it.
I believe we have a clip of the first Alice, actually, so we'll just have a little look at that now.
I need a pig here. I love a warm pig belly for my aching feet. Where are my fat boys? You must meet them. Fat boys! Oh, there they are. Aren't they adorable?
Obviously, on that film, there's quite a bit of sort of CGI computer stuff going on. How do you find that whole world? Because obviously, it's not when you started, it really wasn't there. But now, how do you find incorporating computers and stuff like that into your costume design?
I like it. It's like, it's funny. I was just looking at that clip, and I'm working on Little Mermaid now. And even though the technology has changed, like, a lot, it's funny that in Alice and I ended up making like a whole book of all the digital costumes with fabrics, buttons, trims, everything for the visual effects department, because it helped them to scan it. Helena's collar that comes up like that, because her head shrank and grew, the actual costume collar was almost down to her waist. We sort of cheated the scale of that, so when her head shrunk and grew, they could still use the real costume. So there's all those challenges that I learned on that job that still apply to the stuff I'm doing today. And even though the sort of level of finesse with digital art and stuff is really getting better and better, it's fun to do. You can do a train to the floor and they can take it to the other room. I mean, there's stuff that are so much fun to collaborate with those guys with. And I think I wish I was better at doing that kind of thing. I suck on the computer. So I'm always like sitting and sort of trying to figure it out and then showing him my little thing and going, can you make it more like that? And which is what I've been doing with the Mermaid movie, like stuff like that for the underwater people. So it's really fun. It's fun for me. And it's I don't think for actors, I don't think it'll ever really replace wearing a costume. I think I'm not afraid of it. Like some people are like, oh, they're going to get rid of all of us. And, you know, I'm sure that's everyone's dream, but it's not going to, I think that it's a why. It's a way. I'll be gone. It won't matter. I don't think that.
But before we go any further, guys, I'm going to open this up to questions now. Questions from the viewers, the audience. Now's the time to start getting them in, right? And what we got to do is, if you're on a computer or like an Android device, you will open up a chat window, or you should see a chat window on the right-hand side of your screen. So please feel free to type in your question there. Start getting them in now. We're cracking on with those in just a little while. Well, referring to what you were saying before about being able to do like huge trains and things like that with digital, I do actually see a lot of your of similarity in your work with the late Iko Ayushka, the costume designer who made a lot of her costumes actually almost part of the set. Is it important to you that your costumes do gel into the whole environment that you're making? You work closely with everybody involved in that type of craft?
Yes, I always embrace the kind of architecture of the whole film. I think it's really important in costume. That you're creating a world together. So whatever you can do to sort of work it out, like with the set decorators, like I always see, you know, exchange textiles with them. So the dress and the couch aren't the same color, or if they are, it looks good, you know, just stuff like that early on. So I kind of know what they're doing, and then kind of get inspiration from that.
Well, interesting, we've already had like literally a billion questions that have come in. But before we get to them, I would just like to mention Fantastic Beasts, which you obviously worked on 2 of those for now. Now, actually, we've got a clip. Let's put up the clip on of the first Fantastic Beast just so we can see what we're talking about.
Teeny, you brought men home.
Gentlemen, this is my sister. Want to put something on, Queenie?
Oh, sure.
I can't believe that there's very much that's going to scare Colleen Atwood. But was walking into the world of Harry Potter and all that entails a little bit intimidating? Were you a little bit worried about the fan base?
Definitely. It was really kind of, you know, when they asked me to do it, I knew they'd met a lot of people, and I was surprised that they asked an American to do it. I don't know why. But anyway, I was afraid. Yes, I was afraid. I was walking into, you know, one of the greatest franchises in the film industry, that, you know, this whole kind of people that know and I sort of, I was a Potter fan, but I wasn't like a Potter fan, you know, like some of the people are. Mm-hmm. And so I decided early on that I would try. I wanted to honor it, but I wanted to walk away from it. That I kind of had to read it and think of it with a non-Potter point of view in the beginning, because I thought for me, if I just kind of kept referring back, it would really limit where I wanted to take it. And once I showed David Yates and David Heyman like all my research and my ideas and the world, and met with Stuart Craig, who's one of the greatest production designers that's ever walked the face of the earth. He is definitely a legend. And saw the world and the magic that this man, who is the guy that created Hogwarts and the magical stairways and all that, like his vision of it was as fresh as, you know, as it could be. It wasn't encumbered. And it was so great to kind of be embraced by them all and sort of move forward. And then getting in the room with Eddie and his movement and his take on the character, it was just, you know, once I did it, like, it was fine. Once I was swimming in the pool, it was great. And then every once in a while I'd get schooled on something. I'd be, oh, okay.
Is that, how have you found fan reaction? Has it been generally favorable?
Well, I'm kind of protected from that, probably. So we have people that come in on that are bloggers that come in, and we dress them and how they experience. And it's really fun because they're from all over the world. It's an incredible thing they do, I think. But they're from all over the world. Half of them don't fluently speak English, but they're sort of, they so love it. And they, you know, we dress them really nicely so they can be part of the world. And it's just so much fun. There's so much love in that universe that it's really, you know, it feels positive. Now, there could be negativity out there, but I don't do social media that much personally, so I just stay away from that and just do my thing.
Smart. Okay, so let's have a look at some of these questions that are flooding in. This is an interesting one to start with. Was there one film in particular that really inspired you to become a costume designer?
I think probably early on seeing a movie called The Leopard that Piero Tosi designed made me love the idea of doing something like that so beautifully.
It generally came from that film?
From that film. I mean, initially, Kurosawa's Ran. You know, I go back, so it's like old stuff. The Godfather movies, you know, which I watch every couple of years just because they're so great. And, you know, I just, you know, I think I love all kinds of movies. So, you know, when I was a kid, I watched, you know, I love Vincent Price, which might be more of a Tim Connect than anything. But just the magic of going to a movie, I think, has been something I always loved. And I've always loved clothes. I didn't put the two together till I was almost 30, but you know, they both. You didn't
consider perhaps the world of fashion. It was costume for you that was most important.
Well, I studied art, actually. I wanted to be a painter. And then I ended up having to be employed. I've got art scholarships and stuff, but I had to work, and I had a baby when I was 17. So I had a lot of other stuff going on, and being a movie designer was so not in the world that I was living in. Like, the possibility of that wasn't there when I was younger. And then I decided that I and I'd worked in fashion in the sense of retail and being an assistant buyer and stuff like that, and then having my own early days private business dressing very wealthy women in Seattle, Washington. So I did that for a while, and then I moved to New York when my daughter was a bit older and started this world that I'm in now.
That must have been incredibly difficult for you to, obviously at 17, and trying to break into the business.
Well, I didn't try until I was 27, 28.
Right.
I had to get through the day for a decade.
Going back to what you said about The Little Mermaid, which you are working on at the moment, is that still?
Yes, we're COVID down, but it's going to happen soon. Be back.
Well, I've got a question here. It says, you kind of touched upon it already, but it says, will we be seeing like CGI costumes in The Little Mermaid, or is it actually going to be like real fabrics under the sea, as it were?
That's probably, I'm not 100% sure exactly what it's going to end up being, but no, I think the people are real, but the tails and stuff will be, all digitally made.
Do you agree with it? Someone said to be a successful costume designer, well, do you need to be able to sew? And And, you know, is that one of the main skills you need to be a costume designer? Do you think it's essential?
I think I'm not sure it's essential, but I'm glad I know how to sew, and I'm glad I understand sewing. The people that work for me are way better sewers than me. But I think even for people that work, when somebody's working in costume and they tell me they don't know how to sew on a button, I'm like, well, you should learn. Because I think there's certain fundamental things about design that it helps to know the sort of different techniques and things that only makes you better. I don't think it's essential, but I don't think it's a bad thing to learn. I learned, you know, style and sort of a way to use color and dress, because I had one grandmother that was incredibly chic and fashionable, and I had one grandmother who taught me how to sew and darn and do, you know, things like that. So being able to see and visualize is the first thing to be, the most important thing, to be able to create, to be able to imagine. But it's good to know that you can't imagine and not know a little bit about how to make it work, you know.
I've actually, the question seems to have flown off my screen, but there was a question about your use of drawing and illustration and how that goes into your designs for a costume. Is that your sort of starting place?
You know, I'm kind of ADD. I don't particularly, my costume sketches, my personal ones are really basic and for cutters. Sometimes if I have to have a group approval on a costume or something, I use sketch artists that are really good and they kind of convey the feeling of the costume. But for me, the costume comes to life on the form. When I'm actually putting it on the form and moving the fabric around and figuring it out that way, it doesn't really come to life on paper for me, because there's too many. When you actually, the transition from something on paper to something on a form is a totally different thing. It's something going from a flat image to something that goes around, and where this line hits on the body of that particular character or person's body has a lot to do with what you're doing.
How does that work with actors? Do you show them initial sketches or ideas that you have and go, this is where we're going with it, and see how they react?
Yes, I like reactive behavior. I do that with actors, and sometimes I have pieces, like if it's a period code or something like that, or in that case of that red illustration, if it's a corset that has to fit a certain way and she has to do things in it, I have a kind of stand-in corset, something similar in the room to try on as a conversation starter, like, if this was here, if that was there, can you do this? Can you do that? Because it saves, a lot of times with actors now, we don't get them with a huge lead time to design their costumes. We get them, you know, in these windows they plug into for 6 weeks or something like that. So sometimes the fitting process is very truncated. So it's good to have things like a coat. Does this feel right? You know, things prepped ahead of time. So when they come in the room, I not only show them the idea of the thing, but actually the shape of it, the feel of it, the fabric of it, so they can really see what it is in the room and put it on and feel it. I think that feeling it really matters for actors.
Have you ever had to persuade an actor that, you know, to just go with this and, you know, ultimately you're going to like it, you know, or has everybody been pretty on board?
Well, there's always somebody that isn't totally, you know, that wants to try different things. And I always listen to them because they're thinking about a different thing than I'm thinking about. So if they have an idea, I'll explore it with them. I've kind of had a couple times where people have refused to put on things. And I've really tried to talk them into it because I've had one actor once, I had a Charles James dress. It was amazing. The fabric was kind of peculiar, but the dress was phenomenal. And I said, try it on. And she was like, I said, please just put it on. And she put it on. And she was like, oh my God. You know, I said, it had to have been made for you. I don't know what, you know, and she ended up, you know, fabric aside, we didn't love the fabric, but it didn't, on film, you couldn't tell the fabric was weird. It just kind of looked a bit like a sad teddy bear in the room. But the dress was amazing. And sometimes you just have to be really enthusiastic with people and say, please put it on. It's going to be great. And then sometimes it isn't. You go, okay, that's okay. Let's move on. You know, I think as a designer, if something doesn't work, it's important to know that and just move on to the next thing.
You're not going to tell us you didn't want to put a dress on, are you?
No. Sorry, I don't do that. I don't talk about the people.
Well, this is somewhat connected to that, but which costume has been your biggest challenge to date?
Gosh, it's hard to. There's different kinds of challenges, you know.
Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah. Hannibal Lecter. The mask, well, I can tell you a good story about that. The mask was, we had the mask, right? I have a sketch for it. It's so flat and weird and on a piece of tracing paper. The mask, the Hannibal Lecter mask drawing. But anyway, we sent it to this guy who made masks for hockey, because it's not dissimilar to a goalie's mask in a certain elemental way. And it was supposed to be painted like a light color, and we got it back to try on, and it was the raw fiberglass color, which is kind of looks like dead leather kind of skin. And we got the prototype in unfinished, and we're like, oh my God, this is so much better. We're not painting it. This is the mask. So you kind of have to be able to see things when they're there that aren't what you thought, but it's even better. Kind of like with painting, making a good mistake, you know.
And interestingly, on the flip side of that, there's a question here. Is there anything that you wish that you could go back and maybe attempt again that perhaps didn't turn out the way you wanted it to?
Oh, wow. Probably tons of stuff. I just don't think about it that much. I'd probably kill myself. There's probably like lots of things. It's like, you know, ooh, why'd I do that? It's hard to know. I watch my work as it's happening, and then I kind of don't watch it for a long time. And then sometimes it pops up like on an airplane and go, oh, I'll watch that again. And it's so much fun to watch it afterwards when you're disconnected from it, because you really don't think about, oh, I should have done that differently. You just kind of go with it. So I don't linger in that world much.
There's a question here, actually. How much of your designs now are incorporating like sort of special technologies such as 3D printing, laser cutting, fiber optic, that type of thing? Are you starting to use that a lot more?
Fiber optics, not so much. I just tried to use it again on something after I played around with it years ago, and it's difficult, and to get the optics bright enough without a huge laser to drive it and stuff wasn't, it just, there's other stuff that for me works better for what I was doing. I think I use the sort of laser printing more, laser printers and printing a lot, because I kind of touched on it before with the scarcity of fabric, but you can take a basic taffeta or a basic fabric and put multiple thin dye screens on it and have like a whole texture and surface on that fabric and still have it be malleable, that is really beautiful and brings it to a whole other level. And it helps a lot, especially when you need a lot of multiples on something. And there's like, if you need 100 meters of something, sometimes it's hard to get anything interesting in that length of yardage, or it's super expensive. So the screen printing helps a lot. So I do use that a lot. Laser cutting, I don't use it that much. I know what it is, and I got excited about it for a while. I used it a bit on the Huntsman, but I haven't used it recently for a bit. You know, I kind of burned out on it. Like I go back and revisit techniques or find new ones, and different people that apply different things.
Does that keep it fresh for you, as well as just, just keep your job interesting?
Yeah, you're going, well, it's not like it's out of the picture, but it's like, well, I just use that. Like, what else is there? Is there something else I haven't seen? Just to keep it fresh.
This is a great question. What was it like designing for the My Chemical Romance Black Parade video? And how did that differ from film, if at all?
My approach to it was very filmic. Gerard Way is an incredibly visual kind of guy. I mean, he's done, he and his friend created the Umbrella Academy that's on Netflix. And he's very artistic, and he had this idea for the Black Parade, and it was, we didn't make it, we made it very meticulously as if it were a principal costume for a movie for that whole thing. So the approach was, even though the time and the money was video time and video money, it was like really fast. We managed to do their costumes, and then the crowd was a sort of melange of rented pieces elementally put together. But those costumes were very kind of designed like film costumes. I've done a couple things with that band, and they're very artistic in that kind of visual way. So
you enjoy really just changing it up, do something different.
Yeah.
Do a music video. You've done a little bit of TV as well.
Yeah.
Recently. Yeah.
But yeah, for sure. To me, it's the same thing. Like, I'm doing an opera, that's a bit different. But TV and film design, to me, I don't really. If I do a TV thing, it's the same head that's doing a movie. I don't
right.
Have my TV brain.
But you're happy to do a pilot, create a look, and then it's like, I don't really want to be tied into it anymore in that.
Yeah, or do an overseas thing and have somebody that's new kind of carry on with it and have a good break.
Someone say, do you have more fun designing the beautiful costumes or these sort of distressed and ugly ones?
I embrace it all, it's weird. Like, when you start designing something, the ugly becomes beautiful. Like, you see, like, things you'd normally go, oh, that's so, ugh. You kind of go, oh, that's a good one. You kind of, as a person, you enter that world, and then you see the world through the eyes of that world, and you see beauty in a different way, which I think is a really fun thing about costume design and being in different worlds, designing different kinds of things.
This is an interesting question here. It's actually it's basically about how is it being like a boss of your department? How do you find like being a good boss, being a good department head? How do you go about that?
Well, it's been a learning curve. I mean, I have people in my department, sometimes I have 150 people working for me. I mean, on a huge day, but it's a team. And I think if you make everybody feel like they have a purpose and that you acknowledge the work that people have and appreciate how hard people work for you, that you have a good group. And once you have a good group, it sort of moves forward as you produce things, as you shoot, and all the different things of it. If you play into like everybody's little like day of whining, I call it, you sort of like acknowledge it, deal with it. But if you buy into it and just, it's like quicksand. Yep. It's just like, okay, how do we fix this? And it's continue with that. And, in my world, the people, my assistant and the costume supervisor help manage the workplace. And, today there's more awareness of different things and how you talk to people and for the better. But there are a lot of rules, and sometimes you have endless conversations about the rule instead of what's really being done, which is, right. It's a fine line, I think. but generally I have happy crews, I think. I don't know.
No one's buzzing in and saying no.
Who knows? But I think it's generally a harmonious. I mean, we're so lucky to do what we do. Hello, we get to make stuff, create stuff. It's like, it's a great job. I think I love it.
Well, with that in mind, we are getting lots of questions predictably about advice for breaking into the industry. I know it's incredibly difficult because obviously you've been in the industry for a while now. But do you have any advice for anyone who wants your job, essentially?
Well, I think that the best thing you can do is if you get a chance to work on anything where you're making a story, telling a story, whether it's a commercial, a film, anything. And if it's any job, take it, because you meet people and those people play into, you never know where they're going to go. You never know where you're going to end up. And you learn, if you do a good job at what you do and work hard and don't have an attitude, oh, I'm really a costume designer, but I have to bring you coffee, or I have to, don't have a positive approach to it, people will embrace that and you will move forward with it. The energy, the positivity, and the engagement, and paying attention to what's going on around you everywhere. You can help everyone. It's really important.
So be positive. Is there, does location?
Do the work, take the job, even though it's, maybe not exactly what you want.
Does location make a difference? Do you think people need to move to, say, LA or wherever the hubs are to really make it?
Well, you have to move to where they're making movies and TV and stuff. There's probably more and more remote things going on in different little epicenters in different places. But if you want to do the kind of movies I'm doing, ultimately you don't have to live there. But I'd say to be local in a place like that is definitely helpful. Or if you're in a place that movies come to, getting tied into the film commission or whatever for that area, if it's a little bit more out of the three big cities in America, or Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, it just depends on where you are.
Because Michael Kaplan touched upon that, this catch-22 about unions, where it's very hard for you to work on a union project if you're not a member of the union, but then you can't be a member of the union unless you've worked on a union project. It seems very difficult for people who want to break into the industry.
It's tricky in the US and on the two coasts, for sure. The upside is I think there's more kind of some of this streaming and digital work is less unionized, I believe. I don't really know. But there might be chances of doing that on commercials. Sometimes you can get your hours as a PA, and once you get a certain amount of hours as a PA, you can get into the union. You can work in a costume house like Western Costume or Motion Picture, and you get enough hours, you can get into a union. You get in, it's steps, but you can get into the union, and you can learn a lot and meet a lot of designers,
So be creative.
Yeah, it's not easy, I'm sure.
Well, last question from the guys. How do you stay healthy mentally and physically with such a demanding job? Feel free to say alcohol.
Well, control of alcohol is very important. During COVID times, I've probably worked out 8 or 9 hours a week. I get up at 6 o'clock and work out if I can for an hour. I do a thing called gyrotonics and Pilates and mat classes and stuff. I work out on the weekends. I'm very careful what I eat. I don't eat a bunch of crappy food and overeat on set, which some people do. And, I try to drink moderately, as much as some nights you just want to come home and bang one down. I try to go, okay, It's only Tuesday, maybe you should wait. But I try to do, you know, have a healthy lifestyle and see people and not just think about work all the time. I think it really is good.
Well, I have one last question before you leave us, and it's, you mentioned Bombshell, recent work of yours. Do you see yourself taking on more real world projects like Bombshell in the future?
I would, you know, the thing is, I kind of pick movies by the director and by the script and what they're about. And I really loved doing that movie. It was a great experience with the ladies and with the director. And, you know, it was, you know, a hands-on kind of design job, which I liked. I just did a Zoom movie with that director that's coming out in the fall that was all shot on Zoom. And I did the costumes like in their closets and then drop stuff on their doorsteps and stuff like that, which was fun. I was dyeing stuff in my bathtub, really going back to early days. So I think that the industry, like, I'm willing to take on the kind of stories that the industry wants to tell, and we'll see where it takes us with these tentpole movies I've been doing, if it's going in a different direction. You know, I'm open to it all.
Excellent. Well, that brings us pretty much to the end. Well, the end, actually. Thank you so much for joining us, Colleen. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. This is actually our last Costume Designers Guild panel for the Comic Con, so sad face. But I think you can agree we finished it on a pretty amazing one. Colleen, again, thank you so much. By tomorrow, you should be able to view this online. There'll be a link somewhere on the social medias, so I'll keep you up to date with that. Thanks to the Costume Designers Guild, our partner through Comic Con, Joanne Fabrics, platinum sponsors ABC Studios and Ingle Media for making all of this happen. Thanks loads for joining us. Thank you to Colleen, and stay safe.